acceptable? Is it okay to begin? I've got 10 minutes, right? Okay, so thank you everybody. I'm McGonagle from CloudBees, the enterprise Jenkins company and continuous delivery leader. And today I'm going to be talking about pipeline as code in Jenkins 2.0. And so today, the Jenkins project released a new URL for the Jenkins project. For the Jenkins, they usually go to jenkins-ci.org. If you don't go there anymore, if you go there, I don't know what happens, but don't go there anymore. You have to go to jenkins.io. And what I did is I pulled down a version of Jenkins 2.0 into my local machine using Docker. And so I'm going to give you guys a presentation using Docker. I have to make this much bigger. So I'm just going to start up Jenkins and let that get started up. I'm going to go back to the presentation. And what I did is I ran Docker run and then ports 8080, which is the port that Docker runs on, and port 50,000, which is used for JNLP. And then I forget what minus TI stands for, but then
Terminal
Jenkins,
Interactive.
What is it?
Terminal Interactive.
Terminal, what he said. And then it's Jenkins 2 and Beta 1. And so I'm starting up the version of Jenkins 2.0 that is accessible from the Jenkins.io website. And so when you start up the new Jenkins container, it brings you to this unlock screen. And what it's talking about is inside here, there's a little security script. And what we do is we just paste that in, and then we continue on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to install the suggested plugins. And an error occurred. Oh darn.
It's a live demo.
Yeah, it's a live demo. So unfortunately, what happened yesterday is when before they changed the URL, my presentation worked just fine. And then today, when they changed the URL, my presentation didn't work. And then so I had to get it working. And then this is a new error that I'm not familiar with. But just in the purposes of moving on, I apologize. I can't give you guys the demo environment using a container. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you guys what pipeline as code is, and I wanted to talk about pipeline as code. So it's okay, we can just move on. So pipeline as code is a new DSL for Jenkins. It's a domain-specific language that allows you to model your build pipelines in code. And so if we look at this definition right here, we have a node definition, and we can get fancy with the node definition. We can have it only run on Linux boxes or only run on Windows boxes. We have a stage checkout where we check out this project right here. And this project right here is a little Java application that all it does, this is very hard to read, but all it does is does a math.random in Java, and then if the value is less than 0.1, it fails, and if it's greater than 0.2, it works. And so all it is just a little script that we build and test the pipeline code with. And then we have this definition right here from Maven Home, and there's a tool, Pragma, that looks for M3, and M3 is Maven. And so it uses the Maven tool to build and install your the little Java application. And so that's what this pipeline of code does. And I wish I could show it to you. I'm afraid that my demo environment is not behaving itself. But why is this important? So with pipeline as code, you can manage your builds as if they were a software project. If anyone here has heard the expression that software is eating the world, and Mark Andreessen said that, it refers to having a build pipeline in Jenkins. Software is what allows you to utilize and manage your software projects in a much cleaner and much more efficient way. You can version control the pipeline. You can save it up in Git. You can store it with your actual build software as a Jenkins file. And so I don't have a demonstration of that, but if you can imagine, your software is stored up in Git, and alongside it is a first-class citizen Jenkins file. And this Jenkins file is pulled down by the Jenkins server, and then is run through this pipeline code, and it's run, and it creates your software, it tests your software, and it installs your software. And so that's pretty much the presentation as much as I can deliver. I'm at 5 minutes, so we have 5 minutes for questions. Does anyone have any questions about pipeline? Please.
It seems like this would kind of be bumping into the domain of tools like Chef and whatnot. Where do you kind of draw those lines?
So Chef and Jenkins interoperate very, very well.
We're using them interoperably as well, but now we're getting into, it's going to install this and it's going to do the...
So Chef, if I'm not mistaken, if someone can correct me, right, is Chef has a CD project of their own, a continuous delivery project of their own. And so Jenkins is a CD tool, and Chef has their CD tool for developing Chef code in a continuously delivered manner. And so there is an overlap. It's absolutely true. But for example, what you could do is you could spin up a container, a Docker container, and then you could install Chef on it using Jenkins, and then run your Chef code to configure that Docker container, or virtual machine, or AWS image, or whatever it would. And so you can orchestrate through either tool, basically. There is an overlap. Right now, the strong functionality between Chef and Jenkins is in fingerprinting. So the artifacts that Chef touches as it runs through its run, it reports back to the Jenkins server, and the Jenkins server has this information and can do various things with it, and it knows what was touched and what was configured and what wasn't. Please.
If you've already got a somewhat elaborate makefile or gold file or flavor of the month, and a little glue code to have Jenkins invoke that, what's the main advantage? Is there an advantage you get from ditching that and replacing it with some version of this?
Yeah, so I did not articulate this well. So Jenkins 2.0 at its core is using pipeline as its main user interface for workflow management. And so the powers that be at the Jenkins project have put all their resources behind pipeline as code. It is the future of Jenkins. And so you might be able to model it in another another type of job, like you were saying, and you might be able to continue doing that. But this is the future. This is the direction that the community has chosen for builds and projects. Please.
Yeah, it may be just me, but I'm having a hard time understanding what the significance of this is, because Jenkins has always had a Git plugin. For a long time, it's had a Git plugin. It's always had a Maven plugin, the ability to build Git code from Maven. What's the specific advantages to this pipeline that you're talking about?
So once again, it's software that you can manage it as a software project. You can install a Jenkins file as part of your project and have it build the software. And you're not touching the UI. You're not touching XML documents. You're doing it in code.
But can't you just make a call to the Jenkins API to do that? I mean, we have all kinds of shit that's sitting around that we call a script that.
What's the mechanism that calls it? What's the platform?
Bash,
just Bash.
Ruby, so Python, whatever.
So you're already kind of doing that. So you're modeling basically this. And so
yeah.
This is a first-class citizen in Jenkins, and making Bash calls to the API is not. And so there's advantages to streamlining your process with the community. That's what my answer I would think of. Please.
Okay.
So, with Jenkins 2.0 pursuing this model, what is being lost or abandoned in the change?
So it'll be less and less support for kind of old-fashioned or older plugins, older workflow designs. So this is a great question. I don't have a great answer for that, but that's a really good question. I'll have to find out.
It seems like the main difference to me is that instead of having people go into Jenkins and click around the UI and set up your builds, you set up this code and check it in, which is great if you have a very large Jenkins setup, because once people are doing that, it's hard to keep track of state, and it just turns into a big mess.
Also, with pipeline, maybe I'm confusing Jenkins 2 with pipeline. Like in Jenkins 1.0, if you wanted to chain together projects, like do this and then that, and then you had to create a pipeline, you manage it on a project by project basis, right? When you could configure a project to kick off another one, and you'd have to go and stitch together the links in the chain one by one. with pipeline, you essentially manage the pipeline as one entity. You can say, here's the sequence of builds that I want to execute it as an entity.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So I'm out of time, but just to repeat what he said, is there was a lot of stitching in 1.0, and with pipeline, you don't have that stitching, you don't have to stitch as much, or at all, because you have this pipeline, which is this big software DSL project that contains all of the entirety of your pipeline. And thank you, that was a great comment. Thank you. I'm out of time. Sorry, we could have a...
We'll have open spaces
We'll have
after.
open space.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
All right, up next we have Don talking about workflow abstraction.
Wi-Fi passwords and access, loading around somewhere.
Cody.
Okay, right, where is my computer? I'm trying to get it off my phone.
No, I'm sure. Yes, thanks a lot. I get my...
Switch the signal.
Who was asking for the... Well, heard of that. Were you looking
Yeah, but I was asking that before.
I know.
Just allow this.
Dustin is an awesome You were never there, but you got your school?
I think it's working. I can see your mouse. I think you just have to pull it over.
Oh, my phone, my...
No signal. There we go.
Yeah, not exactly what I wanted, but I guess we'll do.
You're the pass, that's all you do.
Excellent. Maybe right
Apologies for the delay.
Clock starting.
Oh, I don't know. All right. Apologies for the delay. My name's Don. I'm a software engineer with Internoc. We're down the street with a lit up blue building over here. And I want to talk a little bit about managing and delivering software in a rapid and predictable way by establishing contracts with developers as to how to deploy software and to constrain what software needs to look like to be deployed. So just to talk a little bit about what we're doing, roughly once per sprint, which for us is every 3 weeks, we have a new project come in. And the ask of us is to say, now for every commit, walk this through a CD pipeline. I'm not pretty typical CD pipeline, but the problem that we're trying to solve is that the minute the code gets checked in for the first time, there's lost productivity for every minute or hour or whatever unit of time that you want to use, where QA and dev are iterating and they're not getting stack spun. They're not having tests run. So there are a couple of ways, or a couple of guiding principles that we use to try and mitigate this problem. The first is that we assume the defaults are same. So developers shouldn't be coming to us and saying, we want our software to run on C4.x larges, just because we think that the problem, or that we think that our performance problem is because we're running on 3.p, something like that. The second is that we shouldn't be working on one project at a time. If we're working on one project at a time, we're probably doing something wrong. And the third is that, and this is our eventual goal, we want to be able to have the developers take this process over once we feel that organizationally we are, quote unquote, there. So let's talk a little about building code. Let's say I have a Maven project and I want to compile the code, run the unit tests, and push up a compiled jar with all of its dependencies up to Archiva or Artifactory. How do I do that? Anybody? This will probably look familiar to a lot of people. But how do I do that with Grunt? Because Grunt is an interesting tool. Grunt lets you define what the build targets are. So my ask is, why not that? How do I do that with Rake? Rake is yet another tool that lets you define the targets. Well, you're probably getting the picture by now. So Grunt and Rake, like I said, are interesting build systems. They let you define what the targets are, but deploy is really a thing that we need to do with every project. So what we have is a contract with developers to say your project needs to be able to, when we call deploy on whatever its build system is, these are the three that we support at the moment, but more are coming, is when we call deploy, you should compile your code, run your unit tests, create a bundle, and upload it somewhere that we can go work with it. Let's talk about running tests. How do I run tests with Maven? How do I run integration tests specifically with Maven?
Integration tests.
Integration tests. Now, how do I do that with the other build systems? Well, this is a little bit more of a, not gotcha, but there's a little bit more work because you have to tell this thing what you've spun up to go test. And there are eccentricities because, for instance, Rake doesn't allow named parameters, so we use an environment variable, and in Maven it's a define, and in Grunt it's just a Grunt parameter. But this is the general idea: is that we keep things consistent across the build system so that we can easily plug projects in. Who here uses Packer? Show of hands. Does anybody agree with me when I say Packer templates are ugly?
Yeah.
Packer templates are ugly because if you look at this, this is boilerplate, that's enough. This is the chef run list that we actually run against this box. This is the only thing that needs to change from project to project. So my question is, why do we have all that boilerplate when we can do this? This is a pretty cool tool that we use called Cracker. It's freely available. It lets you layer Packer templates together, or layer subsections of Packer templates together that will eventually expand into that big JSON block. This is the base case. We say that we want to run my cookbook against an instance, and that's how we do it. But let's say we don't want the default, which is CentOS 6 running in US East. Maybe we want CentOS 7. Okay, you can have that. You substitute the AMI for CentOS 7 in there, and you get CentOS 7 instead of 6. But maybe you have a very complicated deployment, and maybe it needs to do something totally bizarre, like reach out to a security service to get a deployment token and then feed that to the AWS user data as base 64 text. You're screwed now, right? Well, these are just Ruby code, so you can do what you want with them. This is a very powerful tool to be able to abstract away a lot of the, I guess, unniceties of Packer. Let's talk about deploying code. Who out here is using Chef? All right, good crowd. How do I install Tomcat and deploy a WAR into it? Exactly. I like the sound effects.
Write your own cookbook.
Which is exactly what we did. So we have I've stripped all of the Enoch underscore prefixes just for simplicity's sake, but we have a resource called Tomcat Deploy. And what this cookbook does is, true to its name, it installs Tomcat and deploys something into it out of our Archiva repository. But maybe our application got enterprising. Maybe we need to run it under Wildfly now. So how do I reuse this automation to run it under Wildfly? Like that. But maybe we have a more complicated deployment. Maybe we need to not just deploy an application, but we need the org.apache logger set to the debug log level. Maybe we need a managed data source in there as well. Maybe we need to Splunk the logs. All of those things we can do with Chef lightweight resource providers. And these are, in every case here, these are base cases. There are, I think in deploy alone, there are 11 different parameters to that we can pass. The idea being that we're never actually deploying code just for, or writing automation just for one project. We're always abstracting it out in such a way that it can be consumed by other projects. Just to go in the same vein, this is deploying an application to Apache. Maybe it's an Angular application. This is deploying a Node application using Forever. The only weird part is that we have to tell it what to start because there's no common way to do that. Once we get a pattern for that, that will probably become an optional parameter, but we don't have one yet, so that's why that's there. So let's talk about CloudFormation. Who uses CloudFormation? All right, smaller crowd. Who thinks that CloudFormation templates are ugly?
Oh, that's awesome.
So I
It's like you
had
have a bug there in the tent.
exactly. So CloudFormation templates are ugly. I had to minify this just to get it to fit on the screen. This was our very first CloudFormation template. This is from a POC we did with it about a year and a half, 2 years ago now. What we found, and it's going to be hard to see, but you can kind of see from the, I guess, shape of the template, is that these are all the same resources, iterated 9 times for 9 microservices. So are these, so are these, and so are these. So why on earth would we repeat ourselves 9 times? And we can create another stack and tell CloudFormation to make a stack. It turns out this is a very valid thing that you can do. AWS actually recommended we do this when we reached out to them. What we have is what we're calling the universal stack internally. All you do is pass in an AMI and a branch from the workflow that we have. You give it a name and you say where you want to deploy it, and you automatically get the combination of load balancer, DNS name, autoscale, group, launch config. Those are the 4 things that we kept on repeating. And this makes it very easy and very compact to say, I have a deployment that looks like something in particular. So this is, again, the base case. Maybe your application runs on port 8080 instead of port 80. Well, okay, my notes are out of sync. Apologies. Maybe your application has its health check endpoint at /API/v1/ping instead of /ping. We can deal with that. Maybe it runs on port 8080 instead of port 80. Fine. Maybe your performance team says that your code sucks and it actually does need to run on 4 C4 larges. Sure, we can do that. That's really the idea that we have. I mean, everything is very extensible, so maybe we want our ELB to front SSL. Maybe we don't need an ELB at all because we're not deploying a RESTful service. That's fine. Maybe it can write to an SQS queue. Just don't make the ELB. These are all things that we can handle. This guy has, let's say, upwards of 15 different parameters that we can give to it. Again, the idea being that we can rapidly plug things in, and for the most part, every deployment looks like every other deployment. It makes it very easy to manage code builds and deployments. And I am at. Oh, well, one last thing. Before we started implementing our deployments this way, we could be looking at upwards of days to be able to get a team up and running. We're glad to say that that time is now down to about an hour. So it's worked immensely for us. My hope is to just get people thinking about, modularity, getting things, quickly into a build cycle just by, saying, this is what a common, sane deployment looks like. This is what makes it easy. And we obviously don't want to constrain folks, so that's why if your application doesn't look exactly like we want it to, we can not just deploy your application with your customizations, but deploy any other application with those customizations should the need arise. With that, I'm at almost exactly 10 minutes, so here's some helpful links about everything I've discussed, or any of the tools I've discussed, or if you just want to get in touch with me, there's my email address. Any questions?
Yeah, so given that this is a DevOps meetup, who provisions these stacks? Is it ops? Do they put in a request to ops, or do the developers?
So we actually, we have a quote-unquote DevOps team, which is known as the Unicorn.
Yeah.
The way that those requests come in is they come directly to us and say, can you please deploy this application? Here it is in Git. What we're trying to move towards is a model where developers can do this on their own. And one of the ways we do it is with this very simple, almost DSL for the DSL, by which they can say, here, write the 5 lines of code that you need as boilerplate, and then your application suddenly works.
Yeah.
How do the parameters get into the templates with bug formation?
So, let's see. This is a little bit more specific to the workflow we have. So if I back to this slide, not that slide, that slide. These are separate stages in our pipeline. Each one of these, the output of one of these stages feeds the next one. So what this stage will actually end up doing is taking in like the project name and some parameters from this job, which is ultimately where the code lives in source, where we would get all of that from. This job, for instance, is going to take in an AMI that this guy just baked. This one is going to take in a stack that this one just made. So everything is based on parameter passing.
So,
All right, we'll continue in open spaces. Thank you. trying to get better at time management.
How are you getting too good? Whoa.
Uh-oh.
Okay, I'm Dustin. I just talked to you all. I'm going to talk about a project that I've been working on for about 6 months. It's got around 200 people watching it on GitHub, but I think it's really useful, so I want to tell you about it, and maybe you'll use it or contribute to it. It's called Summon, and I'll get into what it is. I'm Dustin. I'm the developer advocate at Conjure. We do security for automation. I organize this meetup. I write about things at dustinrcollins.com, and there's my Twitter. So, before I get into talking specifically about Summon, I want to talk about secrets and source control, and why it's a problem. But let's start with why it's not a problem. It's really easy, right? You put your secrets in your source code. You don't have to worry about moving them around. You don't have to worry about tracking the changes to them. The problem is that it gives you really weak access control. Anyone that has access to your GitHub repository has access to your secrets. The thing that's often forgotten is that it also makes your workflows harder. Let's say someone wants to rotate a secret for one of your applications. You have to redeploy your application. It's not very efficient. And you can also, you end up in this position where you have to go through your project and remove all the secrets if you want to open source it or make it more generic. So that's why secrets in source control are bad. The secrets not in source control are also not great. It does give you better access control. You can open source your projects if you want, but you stop tracking your secrets in source control. Your secrets are often dependencies of your project. So if you're not tracking them, you have all these implicit dependencies. You're saying, in DevOps we want to say everything, we can take this source code and create whatever we need out of it. But once we start taking our secrets out, it's like, well, and then we have to think about this, just trust us, they'll get there when we deploy it. Rotation requires coordination now, and you need a separate system for storage, so your infrastructure gets more complex. There's sort of a middle line here between secrets in and secrets not in source control, and that's encrypting your secrets and putting them in source control. But I don't really see that as a solution, because you're just creating another problem. Like when you solve a problem, creating another problem out of it isn't very satisfying. The problem is that you've just now created another secret. Now you have a decryption key. So what are you going to do with it? Past that, it might work for a small shop, but it often gets very hard to maintain. So you end up with all these different permutations of secrets for your different applications and infrastructure. And what do people start doing? They start just bundling them all together, because they don't want to mess with rotating the keys, getting the keys to the right place. So they'll just say things like, here's our decryption key for development, here's our decryption key for prod. And then you have weak access control. It doesn't really fix the problem. So I wrote Summon. So I think a good answer to this is to check references to your secrets into source control, paths where they can be retrieved from. So Summon is a command line tool that you list out the references to your secrets. It resolves them into the secrets given a pluggable provider, and then it injects those secrets as environment variables into any process you want. So going over it a little bit, there's an open format secrets.yaml. So we can see here, this is a mapping of environment variables to paths where secrets are stored. Is that big enough? Can you see it back there?
Yep.
Okay. So at the top we have a couple access keys. and then the paths where they're stored. So you can see here we're also doing interpolation. So environment is actually a variable, so you don't have to have a different secrets.yaml file for each of your environment. You can pass it in on the command line, it'll stick it in there and pull the right secret. We have literals, the region is a literal, that's not a secret, that's fine, you could make it a parameter if you wanted. The last one is actually pretty interesting. So one of the things that summon does is you use it by prefixing a command you already run with summon, and then it'll do all this stuff, stick them in your environment. But when the process you're wrapping exits, the secrets are gone. They're not left on your file system. And so the top two keys are just strings, so the strings are gone. But the SSL certificate is actually a file. So what summon will do is talk to your provider, resolve the secret into a memory mapped file. The value here is the path to that memory mapped file, and then it's gone. That memory mapped file is gone when the process exits. I'll have examples if this is a little confusing. And so when I was writing this, one of the things I really wanted to do was allow pluggable providers. These are the systems that resolve your secrets for you. So this could be something like Conjure, HashiCorp Vault, S3, whatever you're putting your secrets in, even if it's a custom thing you've built in-house. And so the providers have a really simple contact. You give them a path, they either give you back the secret on standard out, or they return an error on standard error. They could be written in any language. So I've written a few providers already. It would be really great to have someone else write some providers too. The command line, so I wrote this in Go because I didn't want to have any dependencies. It's a binary. I'm building them for OS X, Linux, and Windows right now, but we can build whatever we want. And the process, so the process that you can wrap with summon is any process that accepts environment variables. And especially with DevOps tooling, most of them accept environment variables as configuration. We're talking sort of 12-factor app. So here's some examples. I use this every day for all the tools I use, so I'm just going to list out the ways that I use it, but really anything that accepts environment variables. So I run Docker with summon. You can see here I've passed the -d flag to resolve environment into dev, and then I've created some sort of Docker magic here where you write summon end file. It will create a memory mapped file in the Docker end file format with your secrets mappings in it, and pass it into Docker. When your container exits, the file is gone. I use it with Chef because I really hate working with the database API. So now my recipes, I can just prefix them with summon, and then it's just the Ruby env to pass the thing in the environment variable. I use it with Test Kitchen. Test Kitchen, you can resolve environment variables for different attributes for your different tools. You can see here again I'm using the var file for the Jenkins Private Key, passing it in. I use it with Postgres. I found this out the other day, that Postgres, if you set the PG password environment variable, it'll read that. I use it with Terraform. As long as you prefix with this TFbar, it'll resolve these secrets into these variables you find in your templates. And I use it with Ansible. In this example, I am resolving the private key that I use to SSH in machines into a memory mapped file. You can run your playbooks. The file is gone once your playbook exits. So the thing here to remember is that summon does not solve authentication or authorization. That's up to the provider. So if you have an S3 provider, you'll probably do something like IAM instance roles. If you're using Conjure, you use machine identity. If you're using Vault, you would use the app ID token. So if you want to contribute, you could just use summon and let me know what you think. You could write a new provider, or you can open pull requests on the core of summon. Thanks. Any questions?
Yeah, this looks really interesting because I'm dealing with a semi-insane environment where one of my predecessors, I will say, has done some cool stuff in the sense that they're encrypting like DB passwords and stuff in a DBC file, and then they're having a automation library run and decrypt those files, so you can reference that the encrypted variable and it will pull them out. But the problem then is they have a OA print environment which shows all the decrypted environment variables. How does this protect against anything being exposed either in the history or the command line?
So the secrets are actually only injected into the sub-process environment. They're not leaked out to the whole system. There's always the case in security where if somebody gets root on your machine. I usually say work on your SSH access in that case. Something interesting I've done with Summon is that for our local Jenkins infrastructure, what I'm doing is assigning temporary machine identity on a job-by-job basis. And one of the Summon providers can read that, so we'll use that to fetch the secrets it needs. The identity is thrown away when the build completes, and the secrets are also rotated.
So if someone was to ask what's the advantage of this over just using something like Ansible Vault, if you're an Ansible shop?
I think Ansible Vault has the problem I talked about before where you're encrypting things into source control.
Yeah.
Chef Vault has the same problem. It's just, it might work for a smaller shop, but every time you try to get more than like 4 applications, and you have some applications that need the same secrets, some need different ones, this isn't very fun work, so people just start bundling their secrets together, and you have an audit, and everybody's pissed off at you.
So where are the providers? Because the main thing doesn't seem to happen.
Yeah, so the providers are all in different repos. Basically, all a provider needs to be is a file you can call. I've got Bash providers, Go providers, some Python providers. It just needs to be something you can put. There's a default path for providers, so if you only have one, it'll call that by default. Otherwise, you just point it to a file.
Zip file is an executable, and it should return.
Yep. All right, thank you. Cody, do you want to get the lights? Okay, so we're going to have an open space now, but we'll take a little break at the same time. Usually we have a whiteboard, but I don't see a whiteboard. So you can either, so if you have ideas, you want to talk for about 20 minutes about a certain question you have or a topic you want to talk about, just write it on a piece of paper here, and in about 10 minutes, I'll get them all together, we'll vote on them, and then we'll break out into discussion groups. You can write as many things as you want.
We wrote something very similar that uses vault and console, storing all the things in vault and then representing that. Yeah, and then the application basically intercepts the application. I think it's a little I'm thinking I might write something for vault.
Yeah, that'd be great. People have asked about it, I just don't have enough time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Cool, but it's really nice.
Thank you.
In the file, right, you put a memory not a file, how does that, where do you put it on the file? How's that?
So on Linux, it has its own kind of somehow, on OS X, it's to like.
Hey, Dustin, should I cut the live stream?
Yeah. It is sort of thing where it's like, yeah, you have root.
I might be doing a talk at the DevOps stage this year about different ways you can turn SSH on.
Yeah. Alright, I'm gonna stop this.
Next talk, we have Martin talking about self-service cloud.
Alright, I'll make up some time because I know it's getting late and I can't stay for the next talks. It was interesting because the previous talks were all very interesting and it all kind of ties into what I want to talk about. And one value add of the Jenkins talk that I talked to him about was you can actually do dynamic lookups. So it looks declarative, but you can actually do dynamic lookups, which is pretty nice because plugins otherwise don't allow you to do a lot of, dynamic variable entry. So that was cool. The next talk was about workflows, so this kind of ties in as well, and of course summons, that's pretty awesome. We can use that within our workflows. So what I want to talk about is essentially in a shared environment. The assumptions that I'm taking here is that you're in a shared environment, which means you're in one Amazon account. Let's also assume you're in one VPC, and because you're sharing direct connect, right? So you don't want to have too many direct connects. And so within that environment, you have a lot. Your blast radius is pretty large, right? So you've got subnets, route tables, security groups, of course, instances that other people use. Jenkins instances and NAT instances. So your blast radius is large. So you're in this environment, and you have to trust the people within this environment, right? So they have to follow procedures. This is kind of like what you really have to follow a workflow and trust the people that are also out there. So one way to do this, one way to approach this is to define not roles, but really classifications. So, you think of an admin role, but you also think of maybe a power user. But outside of that, you've also got limited access and indirect access. And those aren't roles, those are situations. Those are things like, so admin of course has access to everything. A power user would have access to almost everything. So things like they wouldn't have access to AWS config, they wouldn't have access to IAM. Limited would be tying them to a subnet or tying them to something that's only tagged, right? So they can do anything within what's tagged within that context. And indirect is something that's more specific, like yes, you can run a command on RDS or something like that, right? So within admin, you can do anything. So this is kind of like a visual. And within Power, you're kind of taking away some of those services, right? So IAM and, well, either way, I skipped ahead. Either way, with Power or admin, you're really giving them too much control. And when you have that much control in a large environment, we have a lot of people onboarding. And I know that everybody thinks that IAM is simple, but nobody does it the right way. It can always be better, and IAM really is not simple. It's not simple. But people think of it as simple. And nobody does it right, and least privilege is never least privilege. So there was a question actually that came from the audience before my talk about, well, I'm new to AWS, and so they're restricting my access for the EC2 instance, but he nudged me and said, once you get into the EC2 instance, you have really rights to anywhere, and that's because of the role-based structure. So the EC2 instance has that privilege, right? So this is like a backdoor, so you never really have least privilege unless you control this. So my point is, in an environment that isn't fully automated, and really if you work for a product company that has a single product, then you can automate pretty much everything. But when you work for a complex organization that has multiple products, you can't automate everything the same way. So it's just complicated. So you have admin users and you have power users and you have a lot of them. But when you have a lot of them, you're essentially playing a game of Jenga. You really are, when you give that level of access. So a couple ways to mitigate that is, first of all, you don't have to give everybody, even if they should have admin privileges, you don't have to give it to them all of the time. You can give them almost like the capability to sudo into admin access, right? Or you can give them time-based access for admin. But outside of that, I just want to point out that limited access is kind of like isolating. Imagine you tag your instances and your auto-scaling groups with something like allow PI dash or something like that. You guys can that isolates your access to a group, an application stack, right? Just using tags. So you can do that, but you don't really want to do that. You do that until you have things fully automated. But what's even better than this, and what's least privilege, is moving towards something that's indirect. So you learn what people want to be doing, and you give them a mechanism for remote execution for that thing, right? So if they need to do RDS snapshots, or if they want to do executions of CloudFormation, then you give them access through something like Jenkins or Lambda, and they can execute it that way. And the beauty of that is it introduces an execution model. And so that ties in kind of into the second talk, right, with like workflows. And what this enables you to do is it enables you to get everything right in an automated way. So you can make sure that the parameters are validated. You can make sure that you've got constraints in the right place, and you can run all kinds of governance scripts before you execute what is being requested. And you can enforce conditions, right? So I don't want to get into the details of conditions, but since it's a hiking theme, it's essentially like, do we go or do we not go? Is it too windy? Is it too cold? And this I thought was funny, just to end up here. I can't tell. So essentially, you want to give your people the flexibility to do whatever they're going to do, because they want to do what they want to do anyway, and they're going to do it. But you want to reduce kind of the impact that they'll have. So this I thought was pretty crazy. I couldn't tell. My eyes aren't good enough to tell if that's somebody's helmet or if that's blood on the rock. I don't know. Maybe you guys know. Right, but I thought this is also interesting. You just have to let people do what they want to do, right? And just, you don't want to necessarily be, what's that?
Let them fall off the rock.
Let them fall. They don't have to take you down with them. So really what the takeaways were, tags for isolation, which a lot of you who use AWS may know that you can do, but a lot of people don't consider that for limited access, right? The execution model for balancing flexibility and governance is important. And the granting of least privilege, like I mentioned before, is not done as well as we can do that. Don't forget, those roles are a backdoor into all of AWS if you're not controlling that. And the best way to control that, in my opinion, is to actually have a different group manage the deny rights. So a developer is going to give themselves access to everything, because they don't want to troubleshoot, and it's time consuming to troubleshoot what they actually need. So what you need to do is have a security module that's an add-on policy that's all explicit denials, right? And then you can work with security to get through, like, this is why I need access to such and such. Okay? So that is pretty much what I wanted to discuss, but I wanted to know from all of you sort of like how you're handling this scenario, if you guys are doing anything that's working. And since we're on the topic of least privilege, I also wanted to know, if you use things like QuickBooks or Mint, and you're allowing integrations into your bank, why aren't banks using read-only user access? Or like read-only roles?
Some have that.
Which ones?
Very few.
Okay.
Can you name?
No, I don't know about the second one, but the first question is, don't give your developers console access at all. There's no reason why they need console access.
Well, yeah, that's the other argument. But in a fast-paced environment that's not like fully workflowed, and we're talking about onboarding departments constantly.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't go with the crazy route.
Separate accounts for developers.
Yeah, don't go the crazy route. Don't do things that are expedient, because they'll bite your ass later.
Yeah, they absolutely can.
Just don't give developers console access to AWS.
I mean,
Wouldn't that
that's
seem a bit-
that's sort of how business works, though. You're always
Not
you're
my
never
business,
gonna do.
not businesses I'm in doesn't work that way.
Hey,
Alright.
this is a DevOps meetup.
Yeah,
Actually,
actually,
there's a dev part. Right, that would be my point. Would we kind of counter to DevOps?
No, you
them
give
console?
developers the tools they need to do their jobs. You don't give them console access to AWS. There is no reason for a developer to have console access to AWS.
Unless they sign your paycheck.
Well, then you need to quit.
Yeah, I knew that would come up, right? But I mean, in a development environment, they may want access, right?
They may want it, but you don't give it to them.
Well, that's certainly what you want to achieve, but it's not always possible when you're moving things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, up next we have Apollo talking about security as code. Did you want to use your laptop or I can use mine? I already have your thing
Alright, how's it going? My name's Apollo. I've been making websites since 2001. I got into DevOps about 4 years ago. I started as a developer and now I'm here. So one of the things I like to do is do security and DevOps. So one of the things I really believe in is security. That's on your laptop. I think being online might help.
Cody, can you give me the Wi-Fi?
So secure.
As far as on sticky notes.
Yeah.
You know, it's fine as long as the sticky note goes into a safe. It's fine. And nobody got to read it as it went by. Yes.
It's against Wi-Fi. 7 complexity score on the password.
Which hopefully rotates the key every month.
How about it just checks for Wi-Fi?
It doesn't matter, yeah. As much. As long as there's like network is smart to like say limit bandwidth per user.
It starts with the lower PC.
It's a separate problem.
Well, it works. I use it. Just make sure it's capitalized.
Yes. I thought Jenkins one was everyone their own personal account.
I believe in security. Oh, predicting doom to the technology of tomorrow ignores the nightmares of technology today. And Taylor Swift did say that. So if you're on Twitter sometime, look up InfoSec Taylor Swift. It is amazing. So the question is, where's security fit in DevOps? So DevOps, and it's in the name too, you have developers and operations. Again, really well-run DevOps does include people like sales and marketing, understanding the business itself, as well as understanding, integrating QA into it. But on the security side, I went to DEF CON, I had a bunch of friends in security, and they're kind of afraid of you guys. Like, I kid you not, they're actually afraid of DevOps. Because they see you guys as pushing stuff out, going crazy, they have no idea what you guys are doing. That's okay. I do DevOps too, and I really understand and appreciate what DevOps can do for a business, can do for an organization. So the question is, how can we get things going together a little better? So, this is the current state of affairs that Pete Cheslock very beautifully illustrated for us. DevOps is pushing out a bunch of really good stuff, and the security team is trying their best to clean up after it.
That's not fair.
Usually both ends. It's a beautiful illustration. Put a lot of effort into it. So the problem we have with security is, well, why aren't we doing security organizations? The problem is that some of the best security tools you can get from Veracode, Rapid7, Digital, these guys are all local. They're static analyzers. These go through your code and they say, okay, we find, they call them taints or they call them sinks. you know, certain function calls that are just insecure or vulnerable, and you have to use static analytics to find them. The problem is they're going to charge you 10 grand per developer per month sometimes for some of these tools. It's not easy. On the flip side, you have a few open source tools, which I'm going to talk about. The other problem too is that dev organizations do PCI compliance. They usually tend to do quarterly pen tests. These quarterly pen tests are, you know, that's a 3-month, you know, response period. We can't do that now, so it's not enough. You know, and they're really expensive. And a lot of time what they're going to give you back is a big old PDF file. And that is the other problem too, which is that if developers cannot fix the problem if they can't reproduce it. The tool sets used in security versus DevOps, QA, Ops are completely different. I mean, I'm sure some of you guys have seen developers that do websites and use Firebug. It's a really standardized tool, everyone uses it. But I haven't met a single developer in any meetup I've been to in Boston that uses Burp Suite. Or uses Burp Suite.
Okay.
It's a HTTP proxy, the similar way that Firebug does in developer tools, where it shows you, you know, what's going on for your network traffic. Really simple. But Burp Suite is used by, I'd say, about 80% of the pen testers I talk to. It's really standard. What makes Burp Suite interesting is that you can do a lot of really aggressive replay attacks. So one of the common features we'll see on a lot of websites is saying, you know, did you fill in your username and your password correctly? Sometimes they'll say, oh, we found the username, but the password's incorrect. As useful as that is for a feature for a website, it's really good UX. It's actually a bad security vulnerability because we can do password, we can do account enumeration. So, you know, it's a different skill set, a different tool set. So how do we kind of bridge these gaps? So the way that I've started to see it is that I see security as like a superset of QA. So most developers are going to test the happy path with the expected input and the expected functionality of a given site. QA is going to poke around just a little bit more. They're going to send in, you know, there's that joke on Twitter, I forgot to get a picture of it. You know, a QA engineer walks into a bar. He orders -1 beers, 9999999 beers. He orders a AF skitty up beer. He orders a chameleon. So, QA is going to do things that developers don't actually expect it to do. They're going to do crazy input, and that's really good. What security people are going to do though is they're going to do the crazy input, but they're also going to do these really magical inputs. You know, things like SQL injection, things like cross-site scripting. So I see security as basically another quality gate to get over. So if you start looking at it that way, you start saying, well, security isn't this abstract thing. It's actually a test. It's a scientific experiment that we can run and implement as code. So that leads to the other idea, which is called rugged DevOps. So you guys have heard of Josh Corman. Yep, he's a cool guy. You know, Gene Kim. You know, these guys are pioneering this concept of rugged DevOps. And this is the very first introductory section of it. It says, you know, I am rugged, and more importantly, my code is rugged. I recognize that software has become the foundation of our modern world. Mark Anderson. I recognize the awesome responsibility that comes with this foundational world. I mean, we are the pioneers of IT. We are creating systems that manage people's finances, manage their health, manage their vehicles. You know, we create systems that have profound effects that scale to not only hundreds, we're talking millions of customers. You know, I've personally developed systems that have literally helped monitor the corn growth throughout America. If we mess that thing up, we're literally messing up the entire food supply of America. So, you know, we can do better. So this is the really commonly used tool in security known as Linux. This is a Linux distribution which has over 300 security tools built into it. It's completely free. So the question then becomes, well, okay, we know what security guys are using. We know what we're using. We know how we're doing things. So how can we kind of get the overlap of all this stuff? So what I propose and what I've done in some of my projects is normally I'll use Jenkins or I'll use things like Bamboo or TeamCity and things like that to automate the code deploy pipeline. And 9 times out of 10, I'm usually going to use Ubuntu as the base project for that. I'm going to say, okay, give me Ubuntu, let's get Jenkins, let's put, you know, linting, let's put a little code quality checks, let's do some functional tests, a little Selenium, things like that. You know, build that up. But I started realizing if you want to do security and do some really aggressive testing, why not use a distro that already has all the tools built into it? So if you use Kali Linux and whatever build tool you want, that's all well and good. Because at that point, you start automating things. The problem then becomes is, well, you have all these tools and tests running, but you have no way to verify the outputs, you know, do charts and graphs and make it reproducible. So I also work on another open source project called the Gauntlet project. So what this does is it says we're going to use a given when then format to basically be a wrapper on the command line. We'll let you run whatever security test you want, and we're going to verify against the output. So if we find things like privilege escalation, we find things like cross-site scripting and SQL map, we'll actually report on that. So that way the security team can write the tools, but then the developers can go ahead and run them themselves and verify that they've actually fixed the problems. So this right here is one of the given when then scenarios. So we can see running SQL map, which does SQL injection. So we say, given SQL map is installed, here's the target URL. So this is just a local project. When I launch SQL map with all the different, crazy command line stuff, verify that the output does not contain these two tables. So what's nice about this is we're saying, instead of having the security team come down on us and complain, we're actually going to have them give us code for us to write, or for us to run and reproduce. Hope it all makes sense to you. But, so what do you guys have for questions?
Yes.
Yes.
So the Kali Linux, do you have any statistics to show how that is better, for instance, than if you're hosted in AWS using Amazon Linux?
So the funny thing about that, right now, the vast majority of people running Kali Linux, they're running the VM, like locally. That's it.
Yeah.
Literally, I worked on a project from December to like middle of February to actually get it on Amazon. So if you guys look it up on my GitHub account, called it Diamonds. If I can find it. They are here. So what I did was I basically built a deployment version of this for Amazon. And again, totally free. Under the hood, what Kali is just Debian. That's it.
Right, but so, and there's a lot of controversy over this that I've read on the pros and cons of using AWS Linux versus other Linux. But I've read a lot of stuff that AWS works very closely with Intel, optimize their hardware for their kernel. It's the most performance steady platform to run in Amazon Linux. It's also auto-updated, which other AMIs are not. So what would be the advantage of running Kali Linux over AWS Linux?
Funny you mention that actually, because I worked on another project called Bootstrap VZ. And this is actually with the Debian Foundation. And what Bootstrap VZ does, you can see my comments if you actually look up here on some of the pull requests. Bootstrap VZ is used by the Debian Foundation to build their AMIs. So what I've done is I've taken their code and actually adjusted some of it to support Kali. So what you're going to get is you're going to get all the optimizations you would refer to with Debian.
But also Kali.
Are you going to get the AWS? Sorry, are you going to get the AWS optimizations?
Do you
that they've
care
been
for
working on in
security
secret?
But Kali is a tool.
Yes. Yes, you will.
You will?
Yeah, because I'm just taking everything that Debian's doing already and then just pulling it up.
But is Debian getting everything that AWS is doing is what I'm asking?
Yes, it is. Yeah, because again, this Bootstrap project is pulling in all those. A lot of it is kernel functions.
Yeah, it's kernel optimization for the hardware,
I'm glad to see you putting on AWS. Do you run into trouble with Amazon going, hey, there's penetration testing, and they shut it off, or
So about
red
that,
flag?
I've made some friends at Amazon.
When you got to call them and asked, please turn your account back on.
Yeah, they called me. So the way
What
that
did they
works.
call you?
What's that?
What did they call you?
Oh, they just said, we need to shut down your account. They literally called me like 3 times in one day.
Were you scanning your own stuff, or?
Well, that's the thing too, is it's a question of, if you're doing it within your own account, technically according to the EULA, that's okay. The problem comes when you're doing aggressive security testing in Amazon, is if your attacks are aggressive enough, in other words, you're scanning, like really high volumes, what'll happen is that because you're doing shared tenancy, you may affect other people on the same like physical box. So they
But
get a
all
little
they ask is that you submit, we've done pen tests on AWS multiple times, you just need to submit a form,
Exactly.
ask for a period of time, identify the machines you use and just move on.
Well, I was wondering it in the context of your presentation, which had Jenkins running pen testing automatically, which would not be submitting a form. Like, I would submit the form saying, I want it all the time.
That's the proper way of
Essentially you
doing this.
can, we submit a form, we've asked for 6 months and like go
6
ahead.
months, really, so it's not
I'm
Tuesday
surprised
from.
you got 6 months. I haven't got that far. You're probably a bigger company than I am.
Well, once
No,
your build
we're not
goes
that
over
big,
a
we're just
certain
like, all we need is a handful of instances to run pen testing, so we're pretty fine.
Yeah, it's a,
So,
Ask them
since
to not
Linux
be
distribution structure has come up a bunch of times, you know, if you just take your favorite Debian derivative and add Kali's and add Kali in your app sources, do you get something that's useful?
I would say yes, because when you're doing, even when you're doing QA testing, is you have the problem of, you have your base system, which is basically just running OpenSSH, and that's it. So you have to, you know, add in provision and add all these tools. Like, you know, I use a lot of things with Python. I use Lettuce, you know, linting tools, Radon, Selenium. You know, it's a lot of tools. Yeah, you can build up Kali. It's all there. It's good to go. And you get like all of those tools, all installed, all the right configurations, all the right versions. You're good to go. So that's really the benefit of it. It's saving you the time from having to install all of those 300 tools.
So you talked a little bit about the relationship between DevOps and security.
Yeah.
What do you see the relationship between security and QA right now?
So it's really funny. This is just me personally. As I talked to, I was actually had dinner a couple weeks with Michael Lisi about this, and Pete Cheslock. Is again, it's that idea of the quality. So what's really funny is the side effect of doing aggressive security testing. Like if you just do like SQL injection, just do SQL injection against all your URLs, you're actually covering a lot of things that QA's do, which is really, really fun. So just by doing security testing, even basic security testing, you'll actually be automatically automating some of what QA's do. I've worked with QA engineers in the past, and it's really interesting because, you know, you look at a QA engineer, they have to understand what the code is doing. I've had QA engineers actually found SQL injection on their own. They had zero security training, but they actually found those problems. So I think there's a lot of overlap with those guys.
All right. Thanks, Colin. Okay, our last talk of the night. We have Phil Lombardi talking about blue-green deployments.
Hey guys, I'm Phil Lombardi, and I work for a company called DataWire.io. It's a little tiny startup up in Kendall Square. Basically, we're building out a microservices communication platform, but we decided to build this ourselves by doing the microservices. And it's generally an inadvisable thing to do as a startup to start doing that. But since we are building a platform for microservices, we kind of said we'll dog food ourselves. It's an open system, but we had to figure out how to deploy these services pretty quickly. When you have basically myself and one other developer, and we want to get things out, we want to have a pipeline, they'll basically test our code, build our AMI, and then deploy that code seamlessly. And I mean, there's a bunch of different strategies out there for doing this, but the simplest one that exists is really the good old blue-green, which is basically a, you know, put it up there and then switch it out. So that's what we decided to build. It's basically, we're doing it with Travis CI as our building engine. So we've decided to avoid doing anything with Jenkins, just because it's too complicated. It's also a major pain to set up and administrate yourself. We elected to choose blue-green in the first place, mainly because it's pretty simple to conceptually understand. You're going to have two clusters running at any point in time. Well, actually, you're going to have one cluster running at any point in time. You're going to have one load balancer coming into it, and you're just going to swap. And the nice thing about it is, in a case where, you know, things are moving quickly as a startup, people make mistakes. If you, for whatever reason, need to roll back, it's really easy to just kind of, you know, go, all right, we'll cut from the green, which is the new guys, back to the blue, and we're good to go. And, you know, there's minimal downtime, minimal impact to our customers, and at the end of the day, it kind of looks good to us. So that was the reason for adopting. Our flow is pretty simple. It's standard kind of pipeline. Developers commit to GitHub. We work on both branches and a master. Travis picks up the changes that come through GitHub, and then it builds them. We run simple unit tests. It's actually a combination of Java and Python, so some services are written in Java, some are written in Python. We're looking to introduce Go at some point. Hit some tests, and then we have Packer goes off and builds this stuff for us. It turns it into an AMI, which is basically our deployment artifact for everybody. Those AMIs get stuck in the repo, and then we do this thing as a swap. And we use Terraform to handle the swap. So Terraform handles all of our infrastructure for us. we've set it up so that everything is represented as basically a module that a developer needs to deploy their service. So an ELB is generally what their endpoint and their incoming endpoint is, and then they have the two clusters behind them, the blue and the green. And we use Terraform by keeping just a color in the Terraform state file, also associated with a variable in the var file. And we switch it from blue to green. That causes Terraform to go off and change things. There's a little Python script called swap.py that just updates that variable, changes the size of the blue cluster to 0, changes the size of the green cluster up to the same size of the green that the blue cluster was, and then we hit Terraform apply. Usually, if they're not making any kind of infrastructure changes, that's no issue. It's just an AMI change. In a situation where they do have to kind of make some infrastructure changes that are going to cause more complicated Terraform changes, we actually kind of inspect the changes before they go out, but usually it's not an issue for us. So that goes out. So I don't know how familiar any of you are really with blue-green. Like, how many of you guys actually do it in production right now? So the flow is basically, there's a couple ways we can do it. The flow we use is we have a load balancer. There are two auto-scaling groups sitting here, which are have a bunch of EC2 instances behind them. In the first model, you have V1 on blue. All ELB traffic goes to blue. And then at some point, you decide, I want to upgrade, so I change the launch configuration that the green cluster is talking to. Still, all traffic is going to blue. We scale up the green cluster so it matches the same size as the blue cluster, so it can handle the traffic that's already going there. At that point, we basically then connect the green cluster over to the ELB. So now traffic is actually flowing to both the blue and the green cluster in parallel. This allows us to kind of see gradual impact with that change, see if it's going to work. Usually it does, but in the worst case, we can just cut it off immediately and say, go back to all blue traffic. For a little bit it runs like that, and then we start to basically stand by blue, which basically starts to put all the instances into kind of what you call finish up your traffic as quickly as you can, and then we're going to cut you down. At this point, the ELB is no longer routing anything over to blue, it's all handing it to green. And then we disconnect blue from the cluster completely. We do a little bit additional monitoring as well during this period of time, just to make sure everything's good. And then finally, we downscale blue completely, and just let it go. But the nice thing is, blue is still there in theory, so if, we continue to go with green for a couple hours, whatever, and then we discover some showstopper critical bug, we can then spin back up blue to the same size it was, cut the traffic back over, and we have a known working stable version that was there in the first place, which is really nice. Really, really nice. I was actually going to show a demo, but I didn't know how much time I was going to have. So instead, I've decided to share with you my sample GitHub repo where I put this project together. I've included the configuration for the modules for the various Terraform components. I've also included the swap.py. It's a modified version of the production one we use, a little bit stripped down. It doesn't have some things like basically the health checking that we would do to make sure the service is working properly. Doesn't have some of the monitoring stuff in there, but I've commented where that would be if you had to want to put it back in yourself. And yeah, check us out. Check out our organization, check out the repo. Send me an email if you have questions or throw me a pull requests. And yeah. Oh, we're hiring too. If anyone wants to come work for us. Any questions?
How long does it take you to spin up an entire green cluster, for example?
It doesn't take that long, so we can do it within 5 to 10 minutes usually. Mainly because everything's already baked, so when we deploy those instances, there's very little actual post-deployment work that has to be done. We use Cloud.init usually to pull down maybe a config file or something for a service, but every single instance is already baked at that point with the code it's going to run. Most of the hard configuration it needs is already there. So if it has to pull anything, it's like secret keys and it's going to be config files.
How about building that?
Building the AMIs. So from code check-in to building AMI, it's about a 10-minute process. So the AMI bake takes about 7 minutes best, running all the tests. We try to execute as many unit tests as quickly as possible. On Travis, I would say, for my services, I get code built in about under 60 seconds, unit tests run, and then acceptance tests run. That's about 3, and then Packer takes 6 to 7 to 8 minutes, and then that's when you have your AMI ready to go.
So 20 minutes altogether?
Yeah, it's about that.
So you're heavily reliant on compatibility between the blue and the green environments, unless, what, you have sticky sessions?
We don't have sticky sessions, no. But if we did, yes, there would be problems. So there's strategies for dealing with that. Sticky session would be one, but for example, take a system where you have a stateful service. It may not work blue-green to spin up a whole new cluster. Let's say you have a database backing this thing, it's not reasonable to copy it. You probably have to pick a different deployment strategy at that point. So a rolling upgrade is another typical approach there, or some other one where you actually just go back over the cluster and re-provision and stuff is another problem. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
So one of the issues, we were doing something similar. One of the issues we had when we had split, like the middle path was blue and green. Our app is essentially a web app, and we serve a bunch of precompiled assets that the version that's being used in the browser to hit the backend actually is tied to the version of the backend. That design, whatever we're working on it. But basically, when you have a browser with new assets hitting old server or vice versa,
Yep.
old assets hitting new server, is that the scenario you're talking about?
Yeah.
But even ignoring data storage, just have incompatible sequence of requests when going to a new version.
You often need to resort to things like feature flags in that case, and basically if-elsing the code all over the place.
But that still doesn't. What's the structure of your app? Sorry.
No, I'm just saying we're working on some of the same problems. It also goes back to data migrations. It's kind of the same issue. So I think what he was referring to with feature flags is you're going from a back end of version 1 API to version 2 API. What you would do is do a blue-green deployment that would just deploy the version 2 API with no front-end stuff. No one can use it yet, but it's already there. And then the next deployment changes your front-end assets to now point to the
We're a
they go
Rails
there.
shop. That would have been awesome if we're a Rails shop. They go
We are
together.
too.
And you split your backend API servers deploys from asset deploys.
No, as I said, with the feature flag, we deploy them, but no one can use them yet until the V2 API has already been there for a deploy. Right, so the V2 API is there for a deploy.
Yeah, understood. You're kind of just trying to see how would it apply to us because we're messy.
No.
Always a challenge.
Yeah. Paul?
Same idea too, like how do you do that with SQL databases? I've tried that in the past, and the way I kind of got around that with having colliding primary keys is using UIDs. So have you had any strategies like that to migrate the entire database to a new version?
I've actually not tried to do this with a SQL database, so
Okay.
I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Okay, that is the end of our program for tonight. Thank you for being patient. We went a little long. Thanks to Cody and Zipcar for hosting us.
Dig swag.
Yes, there is swag over here if you want to grab things.
Excellent.
Can you tell people what the swag is, Cody? There are cups and earbuds and stuff over there if you just want to take them.
Here you go.
Thank you.
So for users and stuff, we actually